I offer these words from my heart to yours, in the name of the loving God, the creating God, the redeeming God, and the sustaining God, who is with us now and always. Amen. This contemplative Eucharist is designed as a way to draw us into a place on a pathway toward peace and wholeness. For that's always the goal of Lent, that on Easter morning we can celebrate that he is risen, and so our soul too has risen from whatever had suffocated it before, whatever had cluttered it or distracted it or prevented it from breathing fully into the abundant life that God is offering to us. And so when I read the gospel story and really worked with it this week, this theme of peace and wholeness came to me because it is very clear from Jesus's actions today that peace and wholeness does not always come to us through peaceful ways. This is a pivotal story in the Gospel of John. It's only in chapter 2. So from the very beginning of John's Gospel, we hear Jesus purposefully causing opposition. From this moment on, from when he turns over that table and pushes all the animals and all the bad rituals that had developed in their religious system, fueled by the power and the oppression of the Roman Empire, Jesus turned his face to Jerusalem, knowing he would be back here in this same city, in this holy city of Jerusalem, to die by crucifixion. So there's intent. So the destruction that he enacts, the destruction that they talk about of destroying the temple, all of that is a necessary part of Jesus's ultimate resurrection. And so because we're only in chapter 2, it's very easy to remember what was in chapter 1 of John's Gospel. And of course, it's that beautiful poetic prologue that invites us into the knowledge that God was before all time and is beyond all time. That God, this force of love, holds all things in its entirety. And this force of love, the Word that was God, the Word that created the earth, the Word became flesh and became Jesus. And so we know that Jesus can only be and manifest what God is. And so this gospel story tells us there are times when God's actions appear to destroy, to disorient, to deconstruct particular ways of thinking or being, and how that's an essential and necessary part in order to come out on the other side when new life and abundant life has been created. So we remember, of course, in our creation story from the Hebrew Bible, that in the beginning, as God began to create, there was darkness. And from the darkness, God created and separated the light. There was chaos, and out of chaos came order. So we can understand these forces that we often feel aren't right or good or of God. Those moments and times in our lives when things are chaotic or being pulled apart or dark. Because as you notice, that God didn't annihilate the dark. God separated the light from the darkness. So that means that we cannot escape what many theologians and mystics have talked about as the dark night of our soul. There are periods of time when we walk into them, sometimes intentionally, as in the season of Lent, and sometimes not intentionally, but God just does it. God rips apart something within us that we no longer need. God pulls apart wrong thinking so that it can be replaced with right thinking that aligns us with the will of God. And so that part of the destruction is a part of our life's journey. Now, when I find myself in those moments of real despair or of real darkness, it is actually very comforting to me to know that God is in that. God may have orchestrated it, God may have created that situation, that openness in my heart, so I can look with new eyes on something that really needs to be changed. But it's an awful feeling sometimes, being clouded and surrounded by darkness and despair that so often is part of our journey in Lent. And yet I am a great believer, partly because I've experienced it, that God does not wait until our lives fall apart and then suddenly begins to rebuild them, but rather it is a continual cycle that happens. So as our world or as our thinking or as our emotions begin to be deconstructed or pulled apart, God is already busy building something brand new that is whole and peaceful and good. And so I know my spiritual work is always to look around. When things are tough, I have trained myself to look around because I know that God is here. And I may have to do the work of really searching because it's not always obvious at first until you take the time to notice. So I think we learn from today's gospel that clearly the path toward wholeness and peace involves a path of ripping things apart so that the holy can be revealed in our lives. It is not unlike the ripping open of the heavens at Jesus' baptism, so that Spirit of the living God can come down upon Jesus and begin his ministry, or the ripping apart of the veil at the Holy of Holies at Jesus' crucifixion. So, of course, no one wants to do this hard work. It feels really hard. And we have to remember how hard that scene is at the Jerusalem temple, when Jesus comes in and just shakes things up, pulls apart the rituals that had veered away from the praise and worship of God and the accessibility of that, pulled apart the powers of oppression and collusion of the Roman Empire into the religious system. Jesus came in and said, that's not of me, it is not of God. We need to remove that so the spirit can be set free. So in this season of Lent, I encourage you to allow the Spirit to be set free within you. When you find those moments, those obstacles, those horrifying moments that you're in a great deal of pain, that God has brought something up into your heart for you to look at once again. Know that God is with you. And that feeling that pain and knowing the darkness is part of the journey with God, so that we can be faithful, so that we can be honest, so that we can be true, and so that we can live into our responsibility to be the people of God, for the people of God. Amen.